Tyra Cooper, Atsei Cooper, Tyra Maney, Atsei Cooper, Jake Swimmer, and Skye Tafoya. And they are all artists who participated in the Disruption exhibit, which was very important for our museum to do. And we're going to hear from each of them and hopefully have a meaningful conversation. Firstly, I would like each of the artists to introduce themselves, their community, and what mediums of art they practice as well.
My name is Lori Reed. I'm from the Wolftown community. I work at the high school as the arts and crafts teacher. Mediums of art that I use, basically pretty much everything. As a teacher, I have to teach beadwork, finger weaving, basket making, and pottery. My favorites, I guess, are baskets and pottery. I'm also a painter. I work with boards, so I'm just interested in everything.
My name is Tyra Maney, and I'm from the Yellow Hill community. I work here at the museum as the designer, and I primarily do digital art, beadwork, carving, and a little bit of baskets.
Shio, everyone. I'm Atsei Cooper. I live in the Birdtown community now, but I'm originally from Big Cove, and I work here at the museum as a registrar. My preferred mediums of art is beadwork, digital art, watercolor, and acrylic.
Shio, my name is Jakeli Swimmer. I am, I work for the tribe as the Cultural Resource and Archive Officer. I also do run a little satirical cartoon page called Around the Boundary. I live in the Wolftown community, but I was raised in the Big Cove community. Mediums art. I'm a digital artist primarily, but I focus in pencil and pen and paint. Just enjoy all that stuff.
Hi, I'm Skye Tafoya. I'm from the Wolftown community and still live in the Wolftown community. I am a full-time working artist. It's really hard job. I seem like I work all the time, but very enjoyable. And I work in the mediums of printmaking, bookmaking, paper weaving, and basketry. How is art important to Indigenous communities and society as a whole?
To me, I think art is really important, especially the cultural arts, because that's what I teach at the high school. I think it's just really important for these kids to understand what it takes to make it, to understand the history of where these arts come from, and where the materials came from, like the evolution, I guess, of where we came from, such as starting with river cane and working our way up, why we used these materials that we used. I just think it's really important for them to know their history, and of course the arts gives you a big part of the history once you learn everything about the arts. There's a lot of history behind these arts with people, the way that we did things. It also tells you like what was going on during certain time periods, and I just think it's really important for our kids to learn.
For me, I think art is important. One of the primary reasons why I took an interest in art is the representation that you have with art. I know for me, growing up, there wasn't a lot of Native artists that was actively taught about in school, and as I got older and I started to explore a lot of Indigenous artists, it was very eye-opening for me, and it was pieces that I could relate to, or it was pieces that I could see myself in, and I think it's a form of expression, and there's a piece of that artist in all of their pieces, and one of the things that I like the most is the story that each piece tells and like the meaning behind those specific artworks.
Chio. Thank you. There are so many reasons that art is important to Indigenous communities. Personally, and this echoes a little bit what Tyra said, whenever I make something, a piece of myself goes into it, and that's also how we treat our collections here. One of my responsibilities as a registrar is taking care of our archives and collections. So that's like taking care of like our objects that were made for families to make like a living off of, like selling baskets or pottery, but there's also objects that are more sacred in nature, and they definitely have a soul. They definitely are living in a way, and it's so strange because outside of the museum, I could never express that or talk to anyone about that. Otherwise, people would think I'm bananas. But Indigenous art is so important, and I'm so honored to be able to learn from so many community members here. I think that all Indigenous communities are inherently artistic because it's part of our cultures, it's part of our traditions, and it's part of the ways that we resist colonialism and continue on the traditions of our ancestors, even if it's in a different way, even if it's in a modern way, because culture is always changing. So.
Okay. All right. All right, so we're good. Okay. And yeah, so kind of accumulation of what has been said already, kind of focusing on the expression aspect of art. You know, for me, art is expressive, and it's like has been said, tells stories. But more importantly, art in the indigenous community needs to, you know, be refocused too, because a lot of times we become kitschy, we become niche, we become a certain model or mold that we have to uplift or uphold because that's what indigenous art is. And for, you know, this disruption exhibit in general and this whole practice of what I do is, you know, showing that you can still be traditional, you can still be cultural, you can still be connected without having to go through the same medium. So the thing about art is that our art has been adaptable for centuries. You know, before there were stone tools, we're using other things. So when we hold these things about what's traditional, what's, you know, correct, you know, it's always been adapted from something else. And that's why I say as a society as a whole, it's important. It shows that we grow, we don't stay stagnant. And that's what pushing these boundaries need to do, is we need to keep saying, like, we don't have to stay in these boxes. And as an indigenous community, we get to write our own story. We get to tell our own narrative, because for so long we've had to be the ones that had to appeal to the tourism. We had to appeal to the collectors. We had to appeal to all these things, and we're not appealing to our communities. And so for our art to change, we need to start thinking about our people and what it means to them. And I was lucky enough to be around art at a young age, with my father and my grandmother being potters and my brother being an artist. And, you know, that's why it's important to have art around. And it's not, you know, it shows the path that you can survive, you can live, and also be very connected to the people around you. And it's a way to give back too. And like I said, it's a form of expression, because it's expressing to the community how you feel, it's expressing to the world how you feel, and it's a good vessel to use. And so, like Atsei say, these things in the archives, and these things, they're living, they're breathing. We have to respect them as such, and that's to do with art. You know, I think that's why it's important to look at it and change that narrative, because we can still be doing traditional things, but through a modern lens.
Yeah, that's really great points from all of you. I think for me, it's mostly expression. I think as an introvert, it's real easy to like cut off the world. And what I've learned through art is that you have to be in community as well. And so that's something that like I think about all the time with my art now, as opposed to like when I was in grad school doing art, was that I was like fighting a lot. I feel like I was always fighting, but when I'm home, like I'm able to like talk with my partner, you know, listen to people talk, and then also visit other people making. And that's what's important to me, is like the community building aspect of it. next two questions. I think we can start with Skye and work our way down this way. Where do you find inspiration for your art?
In others. I find a lot of inspiration in other artists. I guess family. A lot of times family and genealogy and personal lineage of genealogy. I feel like when I come home is like when I make the most like important art, as opposed to when I'm like in other places. But it is very interesting the way that I approach art making, especially with all my printmaking, is that when I visit different printmaking studios, each letterpress studio has different ornaments and different types of fonts and things that I can utilize. And I always reference it back to like using like different materials for basket weaving. And so then I'm then making like all of my materials, but then I bring them home and then I'm able to make from there. So I find inspiration, I guess, like in people, but also print studios, just by based in different collections that they have that I don't personally have.
And I guess I'll just piggyback off of exactly what Skye has said, is that, I do find inspiration in other people, especially my partner, who we have countless talks on art and expression and how do we go about things, or even critiques about how we're going. But inspiration for my art, it came at a time before we even met, was a call to action, in the sense of, I've always enjoyed cartooning. I've always enjoyed doing political cartoonist, and for me there's not a lot of indigenous people out there doing that outside of like Marty Two Bulls, more well known, and Ricardo Cate. And so for me, it's like I've always seen, what can be done, with the realism that Marty Two Bulls can do and the simplicity that Ricardo Cate can do. But as we met and she introduced me to like podcasts and just more discussions and people in her circle, I started seeing, how art can be more effective if we really fall within it. And we always have to look back of like what built us to where we're at. Everything's been an ingredient to us. Everything part of our life feeds into that artistic expression or that artistic understanding. And for me as a cartoonist, a lot of it was arguing points that a lot of people were constantly telling me and were constantly, upset about. And so I just took those concerns and made them cartoons, and then reached out to the One Feather and wanted that to be placed out so people could see that. And the biggest thing was when they start cutting those things out and put them in their homes, it's like that rang true to something, and I kept going. And though I'm not as more into the messaging as much as I used to be, or the direct messaging, I do still fall within the symbolism and issues. And that's the thing, is like, where do we call? We were built up from somewhere. We're all we always got to greet somebody, because my dad is a big inspiration, my brother's a big inspiration, my grandmother, they've all inspired me in some way. And then people in the community, community artists that we all seen around, that just regular people to us, but to the world they're these amazing artists. And I just like to say, like, another person she introduced me to is named Amos Kennedy, who's a printmaker, and he's gave me the best advice in the world, is because I made a mistake in one of my cartoons, and I thought, I got to delete it as a typo. He's like, well, don't delete it, because if they point out the typo, at least they read it. And that was it just calmed me down. But then he just made another quote. It was like, who doesn't sample? No one spontaneously creates something new. It's all built upon a work of our ancestors, and it will be altered and changed by the work of our descendants. That hit me really hard, because it's like, we always try to be unique, and we're the avant-garde. We're the first to do it, and really we owe a lot to who built us up. We owe a lot to who impacts our lives. We owe a lot to just complete strangers that pass and give us advice. And it's, selfish of us to think in that way, and it's not very, community-based when we think that way. That's all me and not anybody else that did it. And so that's, kind of what inspires me, just to give back. And that's why my art keeps growing and evolving, because I want to show that anybody can do this, and I want it to be accessible and viewable to a larger public audience, and right now my indigenous community audience.
I definitely agree so much with Skye and Jakeli in so many ways, especially for me, I get inspired by so many modern artists. I get so inspired by seeing our collections. I work with our collections every day, and that's a real honor for me. I'm really grateful to work with our sacred objects, our archaeological collection. It's really special to me. It's my baby outside. He's crazy. It's Kanadi. And I grew up around so many artists. So I get inspired by like the river cane baskets of my great grandmother, Helen Smith. I get inspired by like even whenever I was like going to Cherokee, like elementary and middle school, like the teachers there. We have such a gifted community, and one of my favorite things about community, about Gadugi, is how much of all of this, like of our different art forms, as they're always changing, is really just collective from the community in a way, if that makes sense. But I find lots of inspiration in my art from just powerful women in my life, the landscape, the water. I'm always drawing on the landscape and our material history as well for inspiration.
Let's see. I think the biggest inspiration for my art is definitely culture. I get to work with Atsei a lot with collections, like taking photos, and seeing those pieces like in person and like up close. I definitely draw like a lot of inspiration from that. And then I think like women in general is like a big inspiration for me. On top of like they're not like for a while like growing up like not having a lot of Native representation, there was like an even smaller amount of like representation of like Indigenous women and like Native women. And even still today, like a lot of times like when you see like Native women or like Indigenous women, it's like through MMIW, it's through like a lot of like trauma and tragedy. And we're a matrilineal society, and it's like our women are like strong and they're leaders, and we can like depict them in that ways, and there's more to them than like all of this like intergenerational trauma and like colonial violence. So like I try to like do like more uplifting pieces that's like based around like femininity and like women. Yeah.
Thank you. For my inspiration, I think right now I don't do a lot of like painting, two-dimensional work. So mostly I've been working with baskets, pottery. I think my inspiration when I'm working with those things comes from just the materials and just kind of seeing what I can make. I mean, a lot of times I start out with something that I don't have any idea of what I'm going to do. Like with a painting, I just do like an abstract background, and then I may leave it for a while, and I may do 5 or 6 of them and leave them for a while. And even with my pottery, I just start something and then kind of see where it goes. Baskets, the same thing. Like I think I know what I'm going to do, but then after I start working on it a little while, it just kind of, takes its own form on. And a lot of times it don't turn out the way I want it to, but it does turn out usually in a more unexpected and better way. So I kind of just do it and let it become what it's going to become. An example of that would be like I don't know if any of you have seen it, but the mural that I was able to design over in Haywood. I had a hard time coming up with an actual design for it, and I made little designs, and they were just crappy. I wasn't really happy with them, but I had elements of the designs that I knew I wanted there, and so I started putting it together, and as I started seeing the colors and just the way they played off of each other, I would get more and more excited, and then I'd be like, yes, this is what I'm going to do. So it just kind of builds up and builds up. When I work with I guess my two-dimensional stuff, though. A lot of that comes from stories. A lot of it comes from, like, the legends, and a lot of stories that my family's told me over the years. To me, hearing those stories was such an important part of who I am, the knowledge that I have, the history that I have, just came from hearing my mom and my dad tell us stories, that to some were unbelievable. And to me, they're just really, I really wish a lot of our kids had access to a lot of those stories, just because I feel like they've lost out on so much. And so a lot of times that's kind of what just leads me back to some of the content that I have, I guess. And a lot of people don't always understand, like, the full content. Like, a lot of it is so funny. My parents were funny, and they would tell such funny stories, but just trying to put it in one piece, was just a small part of it. So, yeah, a lot of it, the inspiration just comes from my family and my family history.
Is there a specific environment or material that is integral to your work? I'm going to add on to that question. And is there a certain type of environment that has encouraged some of your best work?
Well, to be honest, procrastination or deadlines really push work. I think, I don't know, your mind starts to just quickly turn things out. But again, I think it's just being home. Like, I was gone for so long. I think I left when I was 14 years old and went to boarding school. Then I moved to New Mexico with my dad, and I stayed there for like 10 years. And then I moved to Portland, Oregon for a little while, and I came home for like a year. And then I left again with Jakeli that time. We went to Lawrence. And so I think when I'm home, though, like, that's when, like, my ideas, like, really, really turn. So, like, for my artist book, Olnegay, like, that's where this was created. Like, right after I got out of grad school and I came home, I lived with my brother for a little while. I was just really inspired by all the basketry, and then, like, thinking about my granny, who was a basket weaver as well. And I had to, like, start thinking about, like, what is really important to me, because my dad is also a basket weaver. So I was weaving baskets with him when I was in New Mexico, and it's just, like, something that's, I guess, integral. Well, I guess that's the answer too, is that basketry is, like, always, like, a big part of my process. Even though, like, I don't really do a lot of basketry. Like, I made 2 last year, but I don't think that I would ever sell my baskets, so I don't feel like it's part of, like, my art career, but it definitely is part of the practice. Yeah. So yeah, being home, and then again, like, print shops are always important for my work to, like, expand and to bring new metal type into the mix that goes into my paper weavings eventually. So yeah, I'm right there, print shops and home.
And being home and being around here, there's a plethora of ways to pull things forward, and it's not specifically a material, because I usually draw, maybe draw in pencil, then trace and pen, and upload it to a program and do it digitally, or I'll just start digitally. But it's really the most important thing is the environment to draw these ideas. It might be conversations in Skye are having, or something that I'm having discussions with in general with about the community. But the biggest thing, the greatest ideas come from just having just open dialogue and humorous conversations with people within the community, because that's when ideas fully, for me, grow. I can get a concept I've been working on, and it just doesn't seem funny, and then I go and talk to other people, and it's almost like we have so much funny people in our community that are just always been impactful in my life, because I've drawn that humor, the dry humor, the expressive humor. It came from individuals in the community, and I've always, like, my dad was a jokester, and I always heard stories of him, and it was, like, prideful to be kind of comical, because I wasn't gifted as my other brothers were in all sports, so I had to find a way to almost look at myself and say, I don't care if I'm not good at basketball or football or what it be. What I do enjoy is, having people laugh and being in a good environment. And so that's where I gravitate towards. I like these conversations, and they really pull and draw ideas where I'm like, that'd be funny. Or they'll say, this would be a funny thing for you to do. And I'm like, it is funny. And one of the things I just happened to email years ago, and it was a couple, enrolled members, some of our community members just reached out and said, hey, it'll be a funny cartoon. Some piece of white bread walks up to a bean bread and says, hey, my great-great-grandmother was a full-blooded bean bread, full-blooded bean bread. And I was like, man, like, just all that stuff that builds into it. And I've adapted it to like the larger audience where a white piece of white bread walks up to fried bread and says, my great-great-grandmother was full-blooded fried bread. And so to reach even more, because some people don't know what bean bread is, but yeah, I was like, oh man, I drew it up real quick. It just flew right out because there was no effort. Everything was there. It was laid out. I drew a cartoon. We're always irritated with tourists. I drew a cartoon of an elk and a tourist saying the same thing, like, want get a little bit closer in the perfect shot, because elk just want to get out of their face. And I also have the ability to be around our fluent speakers and my job capacity of archiving and recording and talking to them. And there are so many humorous stories in the language that, are missed out on because it's just left on a recorder. It's that. And I was like, I can turn that in and do something with it. And I'm actively trying to change that. One of the stories real quick was Iron Eyes Cody, who's now infamous, as we all know. He's not just the crying Indian. He was the first pretendian on a larger scale, but he actually came to Cherokee. He actually was here in the 70s and 80s. It's been found. I double checked, but it only happened because speakers talked about it. I was like, this is a farce. There's no way. Are they just making a joke? And they're like, no, he was at Red Clay, and it's all on a recording of somebody speaking fluent Cherokee, and it's all transcribed and looked at it, and it said, yeah, he came up to me and said he's from Birdtown, he grew up on Jenkins Creek. And Iron Eyes Cody grew up on Jenkins Creek or something like that. His family's from there. And so the speaker went to the chief at the time, Young Deer, and was like, this guy said he's from here. And the chief was like, I don't believe everything he says. But he came back to Cherokee and was around here. And there was a notorious party house in Big Cove that always had beer cans and things like that. And so they took Iron Eyes Cody around, and they got to this person's house at Big Cove, and they said, and then he cried. But that in itself, it's like, we can do that in the language and have that laugh because they spoke it, and everybody laughed, and it's like, we're funny in our own ways. We're funny in our own language, and how do we encompass that in ways of art form? And for me, it's like, we can pull that, and we can share it, and we can appreciate it, because our family stories, as Lori was saying, are so important to us, but nobody hears them, nobody knows them, nobody understands them, and the last person to appreciate it passes away. We lose that context, that meaning. And you know how trying to tell a story from a second source, it's never going to be as good as the first source. So we're always doing like a mimic of a previous story of like my dad or something. And so that's what I say when it comes to specific environments. I gravitate toward the humorous. I gravitate to the impactful. I gravitate toward that because those are when the ideas flow and the art comes out a lot better and more appreciative, and I feel good about it because it's not just my opinion. I feel like it's a shared opinion, a shared idea, a shared thought. So it's like my gift to say, like, I can make this something where we appreciate of it. And I know, and just spoke to the speakers last year, and they were griping about tourism again, and I was showing them my mascot drawings, and I said, this could be and they were like, that could be a tourist eater. It was a bear. And so they said they translated it, and Ani Tuwisti, Diné Yagishki, like, it eats tourists. Ani Tuwisti is like a borrowing, but they did that. And then I showed them, they were excited, and I made copies for them, and I was like, that's the most enjoyable part of it, bringing in something. So when I'm in around this environment, it's almost like a rush to get things done because I think they need to see it.
There are so many different diverse environments for me to be inspired by, like Jakeli was saying about like powerful conversations with our community members. Honestly, spending time in the field has been really informative to me. I was actually lucky enough to be able to go visit one of our sacred sites, Watauga Mound, about 45 minutes from here. And just being in sacred places like that, being outdoors, being near springs, or especially for me, being near the water, being by the river, I've always found a really great sense of comfort in the river. Whenever I used to live out in Utah, whenever I would be doing field work, to give more background, I'm an archaeologist by training, so I was able to do CRM work for about a year and a half. And the desert was really beautiful, but it was never the same as it was here, as home is. Home is so special, and all the time I'm just so grateful that this is my home, and this is my ancestors' home. So this is such a good place to grow up in, and really home, and having conversations with community members, and being by the water. That's really good environment for me creatively.
I think mainly home is like the best environment for me. I also think it's the people, so like friends, family, like they had mentioned, good conversations with like community members. I also like being around like other artists that might have like a different like art form that they primarily use, just to like kind of like bounce ideas, or they'd be like, well, if I did that, like this is you could try it this way, or things like that. And I also think like as long as like the initial like idea, like I have that planned out, like I think as long as I have that, like the environment doesn't so much matter for me. Like even when I'm traveling, like I'm always working on like a beadwork project, any sort of like art, but a lot of like those ideas like stem from things that are centered like here, so like the sense of place is important, and then culturally like looking through the like artifacts and stuff that me and Atsei work with.
My environment that I like to be in when I'm working is just being around other artists. A lot of times you have someone there that you just have the energy that's there, and it just creates so much, I don't know, it just allows you to be so creative, and just feeding off of each other's energy, and then having someone to ask a question if you had a question, or, to bounce ideas off of and get feedback. But there's not a lot of opportunity for that. We don't have places to where all of us artists can just get together and work. And so sometimes you can find that in taking classes. I really enjoy taking classes, different types, even if it's something that I already know how to do. I always learn something new when I take another class. And so that's one of the ways that I really like to create and get things made. But other than that, just being at home. But a lot of times it's like I want to do something, but I can't. Like everything is just bouncing around to where I can't really focus on one thing. Like I want to do baskets, or I want to do pottery, or I want to sew. I need to sew, and so it's just always I get so overwhelmed, and sometimes I get into a funk to where I can't do anything for a little while. And then I can just start working, and I'm just like, it's just crazy. I don't know. It's kind of, I don't know. But I like to be around other people that are working. I don't know. And I noticed, when I'm working, I was sewing last night on my granddaughter's dress for the powwow. And my daughter comes in there and says, well, are you going to be working for a while? And I said, yeah, I'm going to be sitting here sewing. And she said, okay, so I'm going to work on some pottery. So she got out the clay, and she started working on pottery, and then the little one starts working on pottery, and so it's just kind of just a communal thing when you're working on artwork.
What does being a part of the Disruption exhibit mean to you, and why did you choose to participate? What were some of your initial thoughts when you were first approached for this project? And we can start down here with Lori.
Okay. It was exciting to be asked to kind of think about something that I could put into the exhibit. And the thing that I did put in was a woman figure, and I had been wanting to do something like that for so long, and I just never really kind of could figure out how I was going to do it. Like, I didn't know what form I was going to do it. Years ago, I went to school in Santa Fe to the Art Institute, and there was an artist that was back then that was really, really well known. She's still well known, but her name was Roxanne. And oh my gosh, she made the most beautiful like dolls, these ceramic dolls, and they were big, and it just blew my mind, but they were so beautiful, all the detail in them, and so I kind of wanted to try it, not something that big, and so this kind of gave me a way to try it. I mean, mine was only this big, and it was mostly just her head, but it still gave me a chance to sculpt and create, and I think just the clay has just really given me a way to explore sculpting, because I do like to sculpt. I've done used alabaster before, other stones. I've used wood, but just with the clay, it's just so much more forgiving, and I don't know, you can do anything you want to with clay, and so I was just really excited about doing that. And she didn't turn out the way I created her. She turned out the way she wanted to turn out. So, but that was another special part of her. But
Lori, when I saw your piece, I knew it was like inspired by Roxanne. Yeah, I could like see how it was. It's like there's similarities in the way that the figures look. But Roxanne is part of my Pueblo that I'm from in New Mexico.
So for this exhibit, I actually kind of had the upper hand compared to like some of the other artists. I was involved with Dakota Brown, our director of education, and Evan Mathis, our director of collections and exhibitions, and I was part of like that planning process for this exhibit. So like all of the branding and like design work for this exhibit, I did that, and so I basically knew like the why behind everything, and I was there through like the start to finish, like for the thought process. And so that in itself was like a rewarding experience. We have a hide from an EBCI artist, John Julius Wilnody, that's in the exhibit, but he like colored it with like bright Sharpies and things like that, and that was one of the feature pieces. And that's actually where I pulled like the color palette for the Disruption exhibit. And I also liked those colors because it's not like the typical like browns and beiges and like peachy like oranges that you typically see with like Native American like art or like design stuff. So I liked being able to use like a bright and bold color palette and like a more modern take for our exhibit. And then whenever they sent me the ask like as an artist to like join the exhibit, like I immediately like had an idea in my head of the piece that I wanted for it, and I thought that Disruption would have been like the best opportunity to like showcase that piece. And it was also something that like I had like an idea for like for a while, and it was kind of like that like deadline or like that procrastination, like it like pushed me to like create that piece instead of just like talking about it.
So I feel like I probably kind of asked my way into Disruption. Whenever I started here, I was super pregnant, so I was at the desk all the time. I just got to help create the forms and everything for Disruption. And I just remember like bringing it up to like Evan and Dakota, if I remember right, that I would like to do a piece in Disruption if that was okay. And they're like, yeah. So I did. It was where my painting is, Three Worlds, is towards the end of the exhibit. So it's by like Sally's Cave and everything. And there was nothing there that had to be taken off, honestly. I was just really drawn to the cave area. And I'll get into that later, but I was really drawn to it because caves are like, for us, like portals to the underworld. So it was really important to me and to my work, and as being an expecting mother. But I can get into that more later. But I was really excited to join because like my piece talks about looting, our sacred sites. It draws on women and our traditional cosmology.
Yeah, and I was kind of a little bit on the later part of the edition. It just so happened that it was kind of one last near the beginning. There was just a discussion on what to do with that, and so it was like we can open it up, and I was graciously asked to be a part of it. But before that, I have family members and a partner and everything, and seeing them, go through this, and I was like, oh, that's really great. And then when it was like my opportunity, like, oh yeah, I definitely want to do it. I'm not gonna, I want to be a part of the party too. I want to go and do this because, working in the job capacity, me and Evan Mathis, the director of collections, we work close together, and so we go into things sometimes. And my grandma's pottery is there, my dad's pottery is there, and we just found my brother Luke's pottery that he had donated back in 2004. Oh, my mom donated it. He was just going to break it because he just wanted to see what a big pot would look like to break. I don't know, but it's here, and so it's like we have this generational aspect of people in the community. And I'm descendant of Swimmer, who's on the tile or the window pane out there, and that was one of our prideful moments. And he used to be on the big opening before we went to the theater. He was all painted, so we always had a connection to the museum. We always knew like, oh, Grandpa's right there, Grandpa Swimmer's right there, Grandpa Swimmer's out there, and so when it was like, well, do you want to be part of it? It's like, it would be dumb not to. Like, so I said yeah, and so it was really exciting to really see on my individual level how this exhibit will go and how I will go through with it. And I'm just gracious that the opportunity opened up, and I was happy to accept and happy to be a part of it. Like I said, there's so many amazing artists already, and tons in there I've looked up to, peers and people I've talked to, and then they got the younger generation coming up, and it's great to see just a generational aspect of it. But yeah, I enjoy being part of it.
I chose to participate because I was really excited about the direction that it was going in, and I mean we've been here all our lives, and this museum was like really awful. It was really hard to walk in here. I mean, I don't think I've been here since I was a kid, honestly, though, or maybe when I was like 19 or something like that. But it's nothing like, it was never exciting to come here. Like, it was dark. It just like felt really awful. So I think when Shayna came in and like all the things were like shifting and changing and everything, it was really exciting just to see that there was contemporary art here, because before that there wasn't any contemporary art, or people of our community that are making work right now, they weren't included at all. So I, like, when I first made my artist book in, I think 2020, like I reached out to the museum and asked if they wanted to buy it, and they kind of just, no, like, but it was really disheartening because this is where I wanted my book to be, like one of the first places, and for them to say like, no, we're not interested in the like contemporary art or like art in this moment. We're just like kind of stuck in the past still. That's why I chose to participate, because we're finally like being able to move forward within the tourism industry, which I don't like the tourism industry here, but at least we can show our current talent within this tourist attraction, as opposed to all the other shit shops around, But yeah, that's why I chose to participate. I'm going to ask each artist to describe the art piece that they submitted, what inspired them to create it, the symbolism behind it, and why it was the piece ultimately chosen for the Disruption exhibit.
Well, I done kind of talked about my piece that I submitted. It was the little clay woman. Um, and she was replacing one of the funerary objects that, I'd seen a lot, and I was really interested in that piece. And so it was kind of scary and kind of exciting to be able to create something that would be taking the place of that, the object that was removed. And so, yeah, that's when I just kind of went to work on her and just kind of let it all go, let it, just experiment and try something new. And I was just I really liked how she turned out. I was really proud of her. But I also submitted another piece, and it was a big painting, and it was the Birdman, which is also the symbol that is on the wall over at Haywood. If you see the one not facing towards the road, but it's the wall that you kind of have to walk up on the deck or walk over to see it. He's on that wall also, and I just think he's such a beautiful figure. He, and I guess really his original form was in the form of copper, like a copper plate, and it's said that he was carried from here, from these homelands here over into Tahlequah, into Oklahoma, into Indian Territory. And so I just think that's a really, really powerful image, to kind of have here, and knowing that he made that journey there and then coming back. So those are my two pieces that I submitted.
So, well, for those of you who don't know, the exhibit's called Disruption because we filled all these cases with like contemporary artists. So when you go through the museum, it like disrupts the archaeological timeline that our museum is set up like. And so the piece that I did for Disruption, it kind of like disrupts gender roles, and it like disrupts like people's like views on gender roles. The piece that I have in there, it's a wood carved mask, and it's called Atsei, and that translates to Groundhog's Mother. And there's this really common mask like in Cherokee culture, and it's like a warrior, and there's a rattlesnake that's like wrapped on top of the head. And like my whole life, like everyone like gendered that mask, and it was like considered like a warrior's mask, and it was considered like it was like predominantly like men that like talked about that mask, and like it was like their mask is like the way they would like kind of talk about it. And I remember one time I was doing research on the snake dance, which is a traditional dance that we would do like before we would go to war. And one of the descriptions, I think it was in Bartram, it said that the leader of that dance wore that mask, and they would basically like mimic like they were leading the warriors through the mountains like to send them off to war. And then in Timberlake, when they described that dance, they said that the dance was led by a woman, and she was like leading the warriors off and basically like sending them like good luck like for the battle. And then in the James Mooney book, which was actually told by Swimmer, there's a story of a warrior who killed the Uktano, which is like a giant serpent. But in the story, the warrior's name is Atsei, which translates to Groundhog's Mother. And in Cherokee language, we don't have like gendered words. So like to say like he, she, or it did something, it's the exact same word. And the only way that you know like who it is by like basically by like a proper noun, so like their name. And I was like, well, that would make sense if like James Mooney was here and he heard that, but he was translating it as like he was a warrior instead of like she was a warrior. And so my theory is that that mask is actually like based on like a woman warrior instead of like a male. So whenever I created that mask, I gave it like feminine features. I also made it out of cedar, which is like an important material for us. And also like through my family line, like my, I think it's 3 times great uncle was Will West Long, so him and his son Alan Long were really well known for like their masks that they made. So a lot of the features in my mask, I actually took inspiration from like the rattlesnake masks so that they have in our collections. And so that's the piece that I did for Disruption.
I just want to say that your piece taught me so much. I learned so much from everyone here at the museum, and you like really changed my world when you shared all that with me the first time. So that was really important to me to learn the first time. My art piece is a large acrylic painting. It's hanging over by Solly's Cave towards the end of the exhibit, and I was really intentional with how I created the painting after kind of inviting myself into Disruption and being approved, like, yeah, you can be part of it. I really drew on cultural knowledge. I drew on a lot of the research I was doing here for the museum, for things involving our NAGPRA process, and Disruption, the new exhibit, talks a lot about NAGPRA. And as a registrar, I have one of the privileges of building our NAGPRA inventory, even though it can be really hard sometimes. It can be really difficult, to be honest. So for my piece, I had the aspect of our cosmology, I had the aspect of becoming a new mother, and the aspect of like anthropology and archaeology and its impact on our material history, on our culture that we have. So there's a lot that goes into this painting. It was really intentional. So for one, the symbol in the upper middle with the hand, I can't share all of the information about that because it's not culturally okay to share, but that does relate to our, oh gosh, how do I describe it? Like our traditional worldview, like how we see our afterlives, involving reincarnation and involving bringing souls into this world. And also, there is another symbol in the middle, and it kind of looks like a turtle shell, but you see that symbol a lot, and we have it here in our collections too. It's a gorget, and I interpret it as a portal, and as women being able to bring lives into this world, I see us as portals as well, and learning about our archaeology, like that involves more than just like broken pots and looted graves. That also involves like our sacred sites that have been unfortunately vandalized. So one of the symbols in that painting, it is a sun symbol, and that is actually a symbol that you see in one of our cave sites. And traditionally, our caves, the underworld, you had to go in there for a very particular reason, and you had to have your shit right, basically, to go in there. You had to know what you were doing to go in there. That wasn't a realm to really be careless with or play around with. And I really wanted to draw on that because I want us to remember in our tribe just that our sites are still there. These places still hold that power, and we as women still hold that power as bringing life into this world. So there was a lot that went into it, and I wrote a panel accompanying the painting about the detrimental impacts of archaeology and anthropology on our material history, and how so much of it is rooted in, honestly, all of it's like rooted in colonialism, and honestly, like Western scholars and non-native people not accepting our sites as valid, not respecting our graves as valid, because we
sorry, there's just so much that goes into it, and it's a really special place for me. It's a really special thing for me to talk about. But that's what my painting's about, is reclaiming that power, acknowledging our sacred sites and the power of our women.
Yeah, one of the things that Tyra mentioned and Atsei has mentioned about this exhibit and what the museum is doing, and kind of going back to what Skye was saying about this museum wasn't for us, it was for the tourists. And there's so much going on in my head that, trying to condense it down so I'm not too long-winded, but, objects were removed off the walls still actively, they're still trying to figure out the next process. Atsei's very aware, Tyra's very aware. This whole staff is very aware, but the thing that we found was like how little respect our own tribal museum had with our own people's artwork. There were masks done by renowned mask makers that had nails drilled into them so they'd stay on the walls. There was river cane blowguns that were nailed that might have been made by somebody definitely is not alive anymore, and there was just no care. It was rather like, let's make sure that the tourists can't take it, but not protect it from being anything. And so that was one of the things that I was told when I first got into this. Before I even was a part of the exhibit, I was being mentioned of all the things that were going on. And one of the people involved is Bo Carroll, who's been tremendous. He works at THPO, finishing up his PhD. He's a member of the community. He's always been a member of the community. And but yeah, he advised on a lot of these pieces. And one of the pieces was right at the front. There was ceremonial pipes. And he went right in arrowheads, and he went right down the line saying, that's not appropriate, that's not appropriate. This needs to be things, you don't need to be to display this. And it's indicative of what Skye is saying, is like, we didn't care because we all joke around and say like, oh, they're chiefing out there with their headdresses, and that's chiefing. Like, no, we chief ourselves when we don't take appropriate steps and protections of our own cultural assets. And when we start selling out to appease an audience that doesn't care, that's when things get wrong and things go down and degrade. And so what my piece did was, it was the ceremonial pipe aspect of taking every bit off. My dad makes tons of pipes. Since I was younger, he'd make pipes. And so I was like, let me inclusion to go work with him. And at first I was thinking, I'm going to just do like a instructional piece on how to make a clay pipe. And I was thinking, like, here's section 1, and it's what you do. And then my partner, I've told several times the story of my younger brother who was in, I think, kindergarten. And you go around the class and you ask, what do your family do for a living? Or what do they do for money? And he's, being young, just said, we don't have any money right now until my dad sells his pot. And my dad makes really big pieces of pottery sometimes, and they can pay for some bills and get us some food. And so the teacher, not knowing, just kind of taken back by that. And so when my mom met her, she said, your son told me that your husband didn't have money until his husband sells his pot. And Skye was like, that's what needs to be in there. And so I took some liberties, expended on that, because as artists, sometimes you got to get paid under the table. Get paid with cash. Cash is preferred. You don't want it's like, why do you want a credit cards? And so I was like, well, that does sound like somebody does maybe sell something illicit, and like they don't want to be known, or they sell to like people that you wouldn't think, like cops and teachers and people around the community. Like, it's just bringing that in a humorous way. And it's also on top of that saying, like, we're taking off these things and displaying something that's true to our community, and also archiving that in a way that it was preserving all these ceremonial objects that needed to be returned to the ground. This can be told, and it's permissible, and like all that. So there's a lot tied into my piece, but it was just based off of my own upbringing of seeing my dad make clay pipes and other pottery pieces, and that story being such a important story of humor that we continuously used it. And I think that was what was great about it, was that when I submitted it, I was like, wanted to bring some humor, because these are dark subjects. This is a heavy thing to talk about. It's hard to talk about NACRA. It's hard to talk about, the stolen things from our mounds, and so like, here's a way to disrupt that heaviness with some humor, and to say like, I want you to leave here not knowing, is he what pot is he talking about? I don't understand. Like, and that's what's great about it. And that's what I wanted it to be open-ended, because you might never know. And I'm thankful for that critique, because it really changed. Like I said, having that conversation really was like, I got it done immediately after that. It was like a week or so, I was still trying to figure out how to put it together. I was like already at my dad's, working on this pipe with him, and they show me all these things, and I was like, I don't know, that's so much stuff to put into a little display case. Then she just told me that story, and I was able to, in my cartoonist comic brain, put it all together in a few slides, and it's right there in the front, and I was just like, it's a way to immediately disrupt, like, this isn't going to be this normal tribal museum. There's some humor, there's a cartoon in here, like, does that belong? But we do know it belongs, and it's a narrative, and it falls within this. But yeah, a little bit of information behind it.
I have three pieces in there. So Onegid, which is my artist book, the museum does own it now since Shayna came in. So that's at the very front. That one's about my granny and her basket weaving. And then when I first made that, I had gotten a residency up in New York and went up there and was like having my glass of wine the first week, and then at the end of the week I was pregnant. I was like, oh. So I was like, okay, now I have to stop. Wine, coffee, all this stuff, and then I started making this book, and it turned into like an heirloom piece that became like something that I can give my kid, but also speak to my kid through it. So in all of the text is like a letter to my unborn kid at the time. So that one's really special that that's in here, just because it's a lineage piece. And my granny's basket, I think she has a couple in there actually, maybe for one for sure, but is in the collection as well. And the second piece, Contraction, is a paper weaving, which is black and turquoise, and it's just basically talking about my 60 plus hours of labor and just like the feeling of that contraction, and I guess just understanding the types of things that you have to go through to be present in the situation of parenthood. It was a real big process for me, and like I'm done. Like I don't want any more kids. It was painful. It was really hard. But I feel like since being pregnant, even like with Onegid, when I first I made the prototype for Onegid way before I was pregnant and way before I even decided to have a kid. But it shifted. Like as soon as I found out I was pregnant, like everything just shifted, and I was writing easier, and I was feeling easier, and everything just, like I was able to make these decisions about the book that before I was like, oh, I don't know about this color, or I don't know about this, and like right away, like when I was pregnant, like I was able to make these quick decisions, like yes, this is what I want, this is what I want. But I think that becoming a mom and just it expresses all this empathy that definitely was in my body before, but just not to everybody. And like I feel like I'm such an empathetic person now, like to more people now that like I've become a mom. But so that's the second piece, Contraction. And then the third piece was something kind of like what Tyra was saying, is like I wanted to create a piece, and it's been like in my head for probably a decade. But I was like, well, this is the perfect time to like figure out these new ways of making. And so from my dad's side, they are potters out in New Mexico, and my cousin Darren Bart, he makes pottery, or used to make pottery too, and so it's kind of in our family, like just a little, like kind of sprinkled in there. And with basketry, it's there. So with the second piece, it's a ceramic piece, and it's unfired, and it's like, I think it's about 5 or 6 inches high, and it's not very well made. Like since then I've like really perfected, or not perfected, but I've gotten better at making these clay vessels. But what I do is like I make the vessel, I hand build it, and then I cut out from it, and then I have all of these like spokes or something that come up, and then I'm able to weave paper. And for this specific one, it was paper, and it was white oak from earlier basket making, I think, like in April or May. So I had all like the materials like ready to go, and Jakeli's dad has been really gracious with his time and making pottery with us. So like we'll go visit him and just sit there and make pottery. So like, I mean, my skills have gotten like revamped. Like I haven't made pottery in so long, but it was really nice to be able to have a chance to bring something new from myself, for myself, and from myself to disruption. And now like I want to continue to make those types of vessels, and it kind of just like projected me on that path, and very grateful for that.
I wanted to add just one little thing about Ornigan. You know, we found out she was pregnant, and she was excited. And one of the things that was in the process of Ornigan was the front cover, which is her grandma Martha Reed Bart. Her and her brother, who also is an artist and is also part of the exhibit, were both working together trying to get her face right. And they worked, and it's just the whole time. That's my own connection, my own thing, because it's like really tremendous of what came from it. And so when Otis was born, our son was born, he came out and he didn't, after your features start showing up, he didn't look like me. But he looked like he favored his grandma Velma, who favors her mom Martha. And so I was like, did all that thought of your grandma's face or anything have anything to do just drawing her over and over again? Because he looks like a Reed, he looks like Martha, he looks like Velma, and like there's moments where Velma's like, he looked like me when I was little, and I was like, yeah. That's amazing, because this is a lineage piece, and how that was a creation of a child who himself is a walking lineage piece, because he fits right in up in on Guy Park. Yeah, I just want to add that.
What do you hope fellow EBCI community members or other Cherokee take away from the Disruption exhibit? And we can start down with you, Skye.
Yeah. Well, I heard a little bit of criticism from the community and the changes that were being made, because everyone's so used to like what the museum was. And like for me, like I definitely have a criticism, because I want like us to move like forward away from that, and it's problematic, like we know it's problematic, but I think our community hasn't had a chance to like learn. Like I feel like they're always so busy surviving that they weren't able to learn like what problematic things were happening at the museum, in our community, or anything, like, because we're just like my parent, or my mom, and then my mom's family, her parents. Like, I don't think they had time to learn like all the things. They just were like, we just have to survive. We have to make money. We have to take care of our kids. And so like when you take something like away from them, like it's really hard for them to grasp. And I think that's where the criticism kind of rolls out. And I hope that like the EBCI community I hope that, and I'm sure they do, I'm sure a lot of people accept this museum, but the ones that like had the criticisms, I hope that they come around.
Yeah, and we just had a conversation today on things, because it evolved around ego, and within Native Indigenous communities, we have some, like everybody's heard the term crabs in the bucket, and we can't see success in people without feeling envy and jealousy, and that what we were talking about trickles down to ego, and we all have it, and it's how do we explore it in a way where we're uplifting and not bringing down. And just like Skye was saying, is like there's criticism. I work in archive, I work in a lot of things, and so when the museum's brought up, it's still that old take, is like, well, they just take it and use it, they don't give it back to the community. And it's easy to get pulled into those conversations and those opinions when you want to stay complicit or stay in that status quo. You don't want to disrupt anything. You agree to it, or you nod it. But what the issue at hand, and what Skye also alluded to, is like we're not having discussions. We're just bickering behind closed doors, and then we say nice things to them, and that's not being true and being true of character. And it's like, is your ego that so weak that you can't be challenged, or you can't just express your feelings so that they can understand those concerns? because they might be warranted, they might not be, but if we're silent and continuously just holding grudges, and when it comes to art, that's what I hope when people walk through here, it's not just, why did they get in there? They're not that good. That art ain't that good. That art doesn't look, I could do better than that. And it's like, yeah, but it's starting somewhere. It doesn't mean this exhibit ends now. This isn't the only opportunity. Like, we shouldn't, as and ourselves, feel like, well, I was in it last year. I need to keep being in it. You know, it's like, how do we uplift? You know, not just younger generation, but the current generation. Like, how do we uplift everybody around us? How do we keep that going? And the more we get on this part of like, it has to be me. I have to be number one. It's like, that's not community. That's not where, that's why, you know, we look at the way the world around us and it's like capitalism and tourism. We gotta, and that's what I say when guests come to this exhibit, it's like, it's always been, it's for me, not you guys. I worked at the drama as an usher and it was like, why'd you change it? Why'd you get rid of the ego dance? Why'd you do that? Why'd you do this? I like the old way. And it's like, but it wasn't correct. It still isn't correct, but it's always that. We've always had to appease. As artists, we've always had to, well, let's make dream catchers because that's what sells. Let's do this. It's like, no, let's do that. And as people, we need to uplift other artists saying, you don't have to do this. You can make it. You can go through it. Look, the museum isn't going to be, it's different now. But the more you hold that resentment, like they're just going to go back. They're going to revert back. You know, that only happens when we don't talk, when we don't discuss, when we don't share opinions and concerns and don't have those needed conversations on every room, not just art, but just collections and archiving. And we're all one people. We're not, you know, it's not, oh, that's the museum's property. Oh, that's the tribe's property. It's like everything we're doing is for the people, because that's the thing is we build up a foundation. When people go, it just keeps going. You know, that's why we're taught by our elders and taught by our families to do things, because they're not going to be around forever. And what's most disheartening for our speakers is when they see us not taking each of those concerns and learning our language or learning our cultural values or just understanding the day-to-day of being a Cherokee person, that there's going to be a gap again. And, you know, I don't mean just the speakers, but people that know the community. And so what I'm advocating, and I hope people in the community see, is like, we're going somewhere else. let's really take the value of that title of this, disrupt. We got to disrupt the status quo. That was my whole premise of having my cartoon page, disrupting, changing, bringing out. We're not one-sided. We're not one opinion. One person doesn't speak on behalf of us. The chief doesn't speak on behalf of everybody, because we were a very democratic person. Our women held value and had voice. And, you know, why has it become so patrilineal? Why hasn't it been so fixated on hierarchical roles? Why is it that, you know, our poorest are still uplifting us, but we're still treating them the way we are? And that's what I hope, that, you know, this is just a foundational aspect of, and one aspect of many that can change. And if the museum can change and everybody can see that, then it's like, well, what else are we doing? What else can we do? Can we meet the museum in that way too? Can we do something in my program? You know, it's one of the things archiving is like, well, we got to make sure that we do deed of gifts, because that way the family can't come back in and take it. And I was like, well, doesn't seem right though, because why shouldn't the family retain like first a refusal or be able to review it? And it's because I think because we don't inform them on these things, and we don't keep them informed. We don't tell them what they're using them for, because it's always being collect, and not use. And that's why our art sometimes becomes stagnant. And so I hope that people coming in here see that these things are not one-sided, not black and white. There's multiple things and multiple avenues and multiple narratives. But it's up to us to disrupt that and get a little uncomfortable at times.
Since starting here at the museum, I have learned so much. I have learned so much working with people here, working and learning from community members. And whenever people come through disruption, when community members come through disruption, I want them to be curious. I want them to feel comfortable to ask questions. I want people to feel comfortable enough to take up space. Because I feel like in our communities we can generally be pretty shy, and I think disruption was a really wonderful way for our community members to take up that space, and I hope that's a good way to describe it, because we have so many gifted community members. We have so many talented storytellers, basket makers, weavers, 2D artists. We have so much talent in our community, and I want this showcase of our community talent to make people really curious, to make our community members really curious, to come out to community events, to have conversations with each other, and to come see the stuff that we have in our archives, that we have in our collections. I learn from it every time I come into office, and I want to share that with people. I want us to continue to share that knowledge with each other, to continue to build our community, because that is what has kept us here. That is why we're literally here. That's why the Kuala boundary is legally held by us, is because of our communities, because of Gadugi. And we wouldn't have all of this without struggle of our grandparents, of our great-grandparents, of our ancestors. And I just want Disruption to really show that we do have a place. Like, we don't have to sell ourselves, we don't have to sell our talents. We can literally uplift each other because we know how talented and gifted we are. We have so much talent in our communities. Like, I cannot stress that enough.
So I hope that, like, just Cherokee people in general, like, when they go through disruption, first, like, we have, like, all the signage talking about, like, NAGPRA looting and, like, learning about, like, these things and, like, our histories and things that happened to our ancestors. But I also hope that they're able to, like, look at these pieces and also see those as, like, ancestors, because that's, like, a part of who we are, that's a part of our culture, and have the same respect for those pieces like you would for, like, another person. And then I also hope, like, they get inspired, especially, like, if they're interested in, like, any sort of, like, art form or, like, creating art. I feel like for so long, like, Native artists, it's like, it's almost like you're, like, begging for scraps, like, when it comes to, like, the art world, and then this, like, might inspire someone and then, like, fight for a seat, like, at that table, and like, more, like, indigenous, like, representation, like, in the art world, or, like, even in the museum field. That's what I hope Cherokee people take from disruption.
I just think I would like for people to consider, like, the history, the historical things that are already there, but also just understanding that some of the more contemporary pieces are just as important, and another important part of our history as Cherokee people. And it's just a new way to express something that was already there anyway to begin with. I had another thought, but it kind of slipped my mind. It's getting late.
What do you hope that general museum guests take from the exhibit, being tourists or non-native guests?
I think it's interesting to have a museum that has some contemporary pieces within the displays, because it gives them a chance to see that our people now are considered important, and as part of the museum, we're becoming an important part of the community, I guess. What I think.
I hope that the main thing is, like, they see that we're, like, still people today. There's so many non-native people that totally think that there's no more, like, indigenous people, like, especially in the United States. I used to work in the box office in the museum store here, and there were, like, so many tourists that would, like, ask if we were, like, descendants of, like, Cherokees, and they always, like, basically thought, like, all the Cherokees had died out, and the main things that they talk about is, like, the Trail of Tears, so it kind of goes back to, like, the, like, indigenous representation is, like, around, like, pain and trauma and, like, colonial violence. But I hope, like, this exhibit kind of shows like we're like writing our own narrative, and it's also showing like contemporary Cherokee people today that's not doing like an art form that we did like thousands of years ago. It's like contemporary pieces, it's like modern art, and it's like basically showing like how our culture and like our people like evolve with like each generation.
What do I hope the other museum guests take from the exhibit? There's so much. The educational parts like that were written for disruption, like I really want people to like read those and study those, but I know that's not realistic for them to like remember every single thing, especially in the NAGPRA and the looting panels. I'm very partial to those, but one thing I have really struggled with in like the world of archaeology is non-natives just disrespecting our material culture, honestly not caring at all about our artifacts, like not caring that our mounds, the resting places of our grandmothers and grandfathers have literally been uprooted, and now it is a grueling task of people everywhere to like get our ancestors back. It's a really shitty feeling to find ancestors in a place they shouldn't be, and you didn't even know they were there. It can be really, really heartbreaking. So I really want people who come here, who are non-native, to really see just how important like our, I don't even like the word archaeology because it's a Western word and it makes something sound exotic in a way, and that's what I hate. I don't want people to view us and our material history as something exotic, but something that's living, that we still take care of, and that we still actively work to protect, and to educate each other on. That's what I really want people who come and visit here to really take away, is that, and how important it is still to this day.
I guess, again, I'll just jump off of that. You know, the narrative, as Tyra said, and Atsei and Lori have said, you know, it's our narrative, but also appreciation of contemporary views. I was in the pilot program for what became I think the Fire Keepers. I'm not sure their name right now. Well, at the time, they were called Cherokee. When I started, it was called Cherokee Friends, and that's when Timberlake's memoir came out. And it was exclusively, you know, had this big exhibit to the museum, and so they wanted it to kind of promote that. So we were asked as youth to dress up in, you know, 18th century trade cloths and walk around and greet people and tell them why we look like this and that. And we had some turf issues with some of the chiefing going on downtown by some of the ones, the self-tanned ones. They didn't like us taking away their curiosities. And there was just we were just walking information booths. We were set up in like the, you know, welcome centers all around town, and we just walk and people would look at us and gawk at us. And I unfortunately once said, "This is from the Justin Timberlake diary," and I was just like, "Oh, I'm sorry. I was just shocked." But yeah, and the thing that came up was like, didn't have, you know, the knot on the back of my head. I just had the haircut I have now, you know, simple haircut. Didn't have long hair, didn't have braids. Barely had any. We just had the one outfit and one like really had like a bone necklace or something like that. And still got asked, do I live in the village? You know, do I have a car? Or I was like, I'm on my phone right now. I was on my phone when you walked up. I'm a modern person. And that's what we have to do sometimes with our art. You know, they're always saying, what is the contemporary art? And we always get boxed in. And I've started saying, this is traditional art done through contemporary means or methods. And so that's what I keep telling people is like, you can't take the culture away from me just because I'm using a digital form. You can't take the tradition and knowledge that I know because I'm not using, you know, clay or, you know, what have you. It's beads. It's like, I'm doing this the way I can interpret my feelings and my expression. And so I hope the museum guests understand that this is an expression for you. It's expression of us. It's our voice that's been silent by the tourism industry, by the capitalistic industry, that we have to cater to you because we weren't allowed to say anything like we couldn't get upset, and we couldn't, we just, became ourselves exploitative. We became ourselves having to be gawked at and told and, touched and things, and it's like the curiosities, and it's like being examined like a living archaeological specimen. We've all seen that, and you see Berkeley and all these other places that are finding it. And that's what I don't like seeing. It's like, that's just as harmful as not doing anything at all, or still wearing headdresses. Because in their mind, we're creating an image of complicity, and that we have to, a lot of people are descendants of Sali. And that story has been romanticized to the point that people think it's like the martyrism. There's so much deeper meaning behind that and as Skye had pointed out, our community had survived, so we didn't care what the true story was. It's like, all right, whatever, I'm going to go back to work. I have this family of 9 kids to feed and all this. I don't care about the historical components, and that's why we have all this scholarship of people that had the opportunity to sit back and study us and ethnograph and do all this stuff, because they didn't have to survive, but then they have PhDs on their walls, and then our communities are still reeling from, they're considered a source but not an expert. And that's what's upsetting, and that's why this museum says that you go in here, you're walking through there, you might feel entitled that you know more because you understand NAGPRA, but do you live it? Do you experience it? Do you have to be gawked at? Do you have to be, tokenized? Do you have to be used in the ways that benefits somebody else but not yourself? And so that's why I hope guests start understanding, is that this isn't for you, this is for our community. And I hope you understand it, because I'd rather you be understanding than the only understanding you get is like, oh, my great-great-grandmother was Cherokee, or my great-great-grandfather was Cherokee. How do I get enrolled? Do you want to be part of this? Because if you want to, I've thought about cartoons too. Is like, if you want to be a native for a day, see how it is. Like, you really want to see, because that's what you realize. It's not this romanticization. It's not this character that you see on these love novels, these native things. It's not Pocahontas, Disney Pocahontas. Like, you want to have the real story. And so I hope that they're not upset, but this is a very expressive and emotional time for a lot of artists, and an emotional, expressive time for me for representation, because I want true representation in the matters. I don't want people on panels that because they are an expert or they might be reconnecting and decided, oh, I'm entitled to this. It's like, no, what are you giving back? What are you doing? Are you listening, or are you just talking? And when you're an infant in your indigeneity, you need to listen and not talk. If you're an infant in your understanding of Cherokee thing, you need to listen and not talk. Let us talk. We've talked to you, and you've just talked like you knew it. I'm tired of seeing speakers and elders sit there and say, I'm the one that told them that, and they got it wrong. And yet it's in a book. I just went to a bookstore today, and I was like, where'd they get this? Where'd they get this? And it's upsetting that scholarship around us has always been catered to the non-native, always been used and done by the non-native, the non-Cherokee. So it's time that we educate our guests in a way that is going to be emotional, and it might seem combative to them, but it's like, hey, the tourism industry rocked us really bad, and we're digging our way back up. We're trying to show them, we're like, this is still our land, this is still our thing. And unfortunately, there was an incident at Mingo Falls that some woman got upset because we closed it for a cultural event. And she said, well, you're going up there. Why don't I? Is it because it's a cultural event? And as Atsei said, they're not respecting our things. That's our fault. It's not yours. We can close the door when we want. It doesn't have to be a mound. It doesn't be, the water's sacred to us. The mountains are sacred to us. When you drive through and you leave beer cans and things and you tear up things just because it's an adventure, or you're hiking things just for the novelty of it, we had to walk those things. Like, we didn't romanticize anything because we walked by it. We lived it, My grandma walked 2 days to the dedication, but she's not in any publication. But everybody else that was there is, but her story wasn't shared. So I was like, it's always been catered. So we need to capture the stories of our people here and show them that their stories are just as important and way more important than any book that we have selling at any of our libraries or stores. It's way more important, and how do we get that scholarship shifted? And so I hope, and I'm glad to see the museum shifting it, so I hope this exhibit shows guests what they really need to find and where they could get true representation, and I hope that grows here.
I hope that any person who comes in here is sharing our art with other people. I think that is something that could be really helpful for each of us, is a promotion of our work, or an opportunity for us to help us out too, and alongside all the other things. I mean, I was gonna say like I don't really care about like the non-native museum guests, because I feel like they do take a lot and they're disrespectful a lot of times. I mean, growing up here it is really irritating to hear all the stupid questions. I mean, we just heard a story about your thing today that Dylan got asked a stupid question about his art, and it's just I hope that stops, and then I hope that we have promotion of our art in other spaces. I'm going to ask the audience if they have any questions for the panelists. They don't. So that concludes our panel for tonight. I want to thank all the artists for being here, our in-person guests, our live streaming guests as well for being here and listening to everything that they've had to say. I would also like to thank everyone for participating in all of the programming that I've done in the past as I move on to this new opportunity, and it has been an honor to work with the museum and with all of the wonderful community members and artists that I have so far.